Imagine paying a security guard billions of dollars to protect your house.
Right?
You roll out the red carpet for him, you buy him the best equipment, and you make it incredibly clear that your only goal is just, peace and quiet in your neighborhood.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, instead of keeping the peace, he uses your money to literally kick down your neighbor's door, starting this massive shootout that, well, burns your own house to the ground.
I mean, it sounds like a terrible action movie plot, but
It does.
But that is exactly how the wealthiest nations in the Middle East feel about the United States right now.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. If you're the kind of learner who looks at the chaotic, 24/7 news cycle surrounding the current U.S.-Iran war and just feels totally overwhelmed, you are in the right place.
Oh, absolutely.
Because right now, the information environment is just a complete mess. It's all speculation, unnamed sources, competing narratives.
It really is. I mean, when events are moving this fast, it's so easy to kind of lose the thread of how we actually got here.
Yeah. Right. So today, our mission is to cut through all of that noise. We're pulling from this deeply detailed interview with Jasmine El-Gamal. She's a former Pentagon Middle East analyst who actually worked inside the U.S. government on these exact issues.
Which gives a great perspective.
Exactly. We're taking her insights and extracting the hard facts, like the hidden mechanisms of how this conflict actually triggered, why these major players are behaving so unpredictably, and how this chaos is actively shifting the entire global balance of power.
And just to kind of set the table before we jump into the timeline, the intelligence and the sources we're unpacking today, they involve multiple U.S. administrations.
Yeah, a lot of them.
We're talking about the Obama administration, the Biden administration, and the current Trump administration, alongside the Israeli government and, of course, regional Gulf leaders.
Right. And because this involves so many polarizing figures, let me just be crystal clear for a second. Our job today isn't to play political referee.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to tell you who the quote-unquote good guys are, and we certainly aren't endorsing any specific national agendas. Our goal is strictly to, well, strip away the political spin and show you the raw strategic math happening behind closed doors.
So you can understand the architecture of this crisis for yourself.
Exactly.
Which is vital because to understand where the globe is heading, we first have to unpack the highly debated origins of what actually triggered this war in the first place.
Right.
And that means looking straight at the intense, behind-the-scenes debate over who truly drove the decision to escalate.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you look at the raw statements coming out from high-level officials, the finger-pointing is just intense.
Oh, it's off the charts.
There's this very clear narrative emerging from the intelligence community about foreign pressure.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center director recently resigned.
Yeah.
And in intelligence circles, you don't just, resign quietly over a minor disagreement.
Definitely not. It's a huge deal.
Right. And he explicitly cited pressure from Israel and a, quote, powerful American lobby as a primary reason for the U.S. entering a war he viewed as completely unnecessary.
And, he really isn't a lone voice in the wilderness here.
Wow.
You have the UK National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, going on the record regarding figures in the Trump administration, specifically like Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff.
Right, the real estate guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Powell stated that they were essentially viewed as, quote, Israeli assets.
Wow.
Now, in this context, asset doesn't mean like a spy in a trench coat, right?
Yeah.
It means they were viewed as carrying water for a foreign policy goal, essentially dragging the U.S. president into a war he initially wanted to avoid, especially when, according to Powell, there was actually serious diplomatic progress being made to prevent an escalation.
And then you layer on the historical context from former Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who served under Biden.
Right.
Blinken pointed out that Israel has pushed essentially every recent U.S. president. And that includes Obama for military action against Iran's nuclear program.
Yeah, relentlessly.
At times, Israel even threatened unilateral strikes. They're basically warning the U.S., look, if you don't bomb them, we will do it alone.
Which forces America's hand.
Exactly, because the U.S. can't afford to let its closest regional ally just, go rogue.
Right. It paints a picture of immense, sustained pressure over decades. It's really not a secret. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly stated that regime change in Iran is a personal and national objective that he has sought for, 40 years?
40 years, yeah. But I do have to push back a little bit here on the narrative that Israel is solely to blame, or that the U.S. was just somehow, tricked into this.
Okay, let's hear it.
To me, it's like being in the passenger seat of a car and shouting at the driver to swerve. The passenger might be incredibly loud. They might be incredibly persuasive. They might even grab at the steering wheel.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, the driver is the one whose foot is on the gas and who physically turns the wheel.
I like the car analogy, but it's actually messier than that. The passenger hasn't just been shouting. The passenger has been mapping the route and offering to pay for the gas for 40 years.
Okay, fair point.
But your core point is absolutely right. You cannot completely absolve the U.S. president from responsibility here. Ultimate agency lies in the Oval Office.
Right.
Yes, the Israelis lobbied heavily. But President Trump is the one who ultimately looked at the board and decided it was a good idea to actually, pull the trigger.
Which raises an immediate, glaring question. If the U.S. and Israel are driving in the same car, why are they looking at completely different maps?
Yeah.
Why do they approach this region with such drastically different priorities?
And that comes down to a fundamental difference in how they define the word threat. We really have to separate Israeli national security objectives from American ones.
Okay.
For Israel, Iran is a genuine existential threat. This isn't just political rhetoric for them.
Right. It's real.
It's fueled by Iran's expansionist policies since their 1979 revolution. Iran has spent decades building what they call a ring of fire around Israel.
Exporting the revolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Propping up Bashar al-Assad in Syria, heavily arming proxies right on Israel's borders like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. For Israel, fighting Iran is about sheer, literal survival.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because for the United States, Iran was never an imminent or existential threat to the American homeland.
No, not at all.
Let's be real. Iran was not launching an amphibious invasion of Florida anytime soon.
Right.
And usually, that kind of direct threat is what legally justifies war. But that wasn't the case here.
Not even close. The U.S. strategic interest in the Middle East is entirely different. The U.S. acts as the guarantor of the global economy.
Right.
Their primary concern is protecting global shipping lanes. Think about the Strait of Hormuz.
It's tiny.
It's so narrow you can practically see across it. But a massive chunk of the world's daily oil supply squeezes through it. The U.S. cares about keeping those lanes open and protecting them from Iranian proxies like the Houthis. It's about keeping the worldwide economy moving safely.
And if you look at the diplomatic history, it's been this pendulum swinging wildly between those two different maps.
Oh, yeah.
You had President Obama looking at the map and saying, let's use diplomacy. That resulted in the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, where the U.S. basically said, we will lift economic sanctions if you freeze your nuclear program. The Israelis hated that deal because it left the Iranian regime in power.
Yep.
Then President Trump comes in during his first term, calls it a terrible deal, and pulls the U.S. out of it entirely.
Which, ironically, is exactly what prompted Iran to start enriching nuclear material again.
Right.
Then President Biden came in and completely failed to negotiate a new deal. So by the time we arrive at the current Trump administration, things have gone from bad to worse regarding containing Iran's ambitions.
So you have the U.S., whose math is based on shipping lanes and economic stability.
Yeah.
And Israel, whose math is based on a literal existential threat to its very existence.
What's fascinating here is how combining those two distinctly different motivations created an incredibly explosive cocktail.
Yeah.
The U.S. wanted to maintain regional stability and project strength, while Israel wanted to completely dismantle the Iranian regime. When those forces merged in the Oval Office, it stripped away all the usual diplomatic restraints, leading directly to the unrestrained military actions we're seeing now.
And that leads to a catastrophic miscalculation. I mean, the U.S. administration entered this conflict seemingly expecting to manage it, right?
Right.
To sort of turn up the heat just enough to get Iran to back down. But a severe misreading of the opponent's psychology led to a massive regional surprise.
We really need to look at how the administration approached the buildup. President Trump campaigned heavily on being the ultimate deal maker.
Right, the art of the deal.
Exactly. He talked about ending wars and bringing peace through strength. Yet, when it came to the actual policy applied to Iran, the administration demanded unconditional surrender.
Wow.
They even demanded to be involved in decisions regarding Iran's internal political succession.
So they basically left Iran with zero off-ramps.
Yeah.
No emergency exit through negotiation at all?
None. And that stems from a highly documented, highly unconventional decision-making style. General H.R. McMaster, the former National Security Advisor, wrote in his memoir about how the president can be extremely impetuous.
Yeah?
He frequently bypasses standard National Security Council procedures, the normal pros and cons risk assessments, the deep intelligence briefings. Those just get sidelined.
Right.
Instead, McMaster noted that the president tends to listen to the last person in the room. McMaster even admitted he used to try and ensure he was literally the last person walking out of the Oval Office, so his advice would be the one that stuck.
Wait, that is wild.
It really is.
So we're talking about the mechanics of global war being decided by whoever literally holds the door handle last. Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
But put yourself in Iran's shoes for a second. If you were backed into a corner and the most powerful military on earth explicitly calls for regime change, meaning the end of your government and likely the end of your life, didn't the U.S. essentially force Iran into a nothing-left-to-lose mentality?
Yes, that is exactly the psychological blind spot. The U.S. war planners projected Western logic onto a theocratic regime.
Right.
The U.S. administration severely misunderstood Iranian resolve. This is a regime born from the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Their entire culture, their foundational mythos, is built on the concept of absolute martyrdom and sacrifice to survive against Western imperialism.
They don't bluff.
They do not have a fold button. Squeezing them without an exit strategy was a fatal error in scenario planning.
And that brings us to the surprise that completely flipped the board. When the U.S. war-gamed this out, standard military scenario planning predicted that if Iran retaliated, they would hit U.S. military bases in the region or maybe lob missiles at Tel Aviv.
Because that is the traditional military playbook.
Right.
But because Iran felt an existential threat of total regime change, they threw that playbook out the window. They realized they couldn't win a traditional shootout with the U.S. military.
No way.
So if you can't hit the sniper, you hit the sniper's bank account. Iran enacted a scorched earth policy.
Wow.
They bypassed the heavily fortified military targets and instead hit civilian infrastructure. Luxury hotels, embassies, and critical energy and desalination facilities right in the heart of the wealthy Gulf states.
So they decided if they were going down, they were going to make sure the cost was so unbearably high for everyone around them that the world would just have to intervene.
Precisely. By squeezing Iran too tightly and completely misunderstanding their breaking point, the U.S. inadvertently devastated the region's stability. And in doing so, they profoundly damaged their own relations with some of their wealthiest and most strategically important allies.
Which brings us to the collateral damage of all this political maneuvering, the Gulf states. And this is where the massive global shifts start happening. Because the Gulf countries, places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are now fundamentally rethinking their place in the entire world order.
The position of the Gulf states right now is almost impossible. Remember, prior to this war, they were actively seeking what they called strategic calm.
Right, cooling things down.
They wanted to cool tensions. They even allowed China, not the United States, but China, to step in and broker a diplomatic normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Which is huge.
It is. And why China? Because China actually buys their oil, so China has a vested interest in keeping the peace. The Gulf wanted to stay neutral and just focus on their own massive economic development projects.
And they poured resources into making sure the U.S. understood that. I mean, they invested heavily in the Trump relationship during his first and second term.
Oh, heavily.
They rolled out the red carpet. They pledged trillions of dollars in investments to the United States. All of this was essentially, well, a massive premium paid to an insurance company, specifically designed to persuade the U.S. not to attack Iran. Right. Because they knew exactly how bad the blowback would be for their own glass cities and oil refineries.
But they were ignored. The U.S. took the investments and went ahead anyway. And now, the Gulf states feel entirely betrayed from all sides.
Yeah.
They feel betrayed by Iran for attacking their civilian infrastructure, and they feel deeply, fundamentally betrayed by the United States for starting a war they explicitly paid to prevent.
And to add insult to injury, the U.S. is reportedly prioritizing Israeli air defense over the Gulf.
Yes.
There is a finite amount of air defense munitions in the region, and the U.S. is moving those scarce resources away from the Gulf states, who, again, are currently taking hits to their civilian infrastructure and giving them to Israel.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, Israel is utilizing this chaotic moment to establish unprecedented regional dominance.
They are acting without restraint. Post-October 7th, Israel has shifted its own narrative. They are no longer calling themselves just a regional power. They're acting as a self-proclaimed global superpower. They are making military equipment deals with Azerbaijan. They are looking to establish bases in Somaliland.
Wait, Somaliland?
Yes, and just to clarify why that matters, Somaliland sits right on the Horn of Africa. Putting a military base there is like jamming a crowbar into the Red Sea shipping lanes.
Right.
It gives Israel unprecedented leverage over global trade routes, expanding their reach in ways that deeply alarm neighboring countries.
So when we talk about all these moving parts, Somaliland, the Gulf, the airstrikes, what does this all actually mean for you?
That's the big question.
Because it is so easy to tune this out as distant political maneuvering. But when a drone strikes an energy facility in the Gulf, it doesn't just stay in the Gulf.
No.
It disrupts the global shipping lanes, and 3 weeks later, it hits your grocery bill.
Right.
It hits the price of gas. This is about a total seismic shift in global wealth and security.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the era of the Gulf states relying entirely on the U.S. security umbrella is ending.
It's over.
Think of it like a massive company realizing its sole supplier is erratic and untrustworthy, so they frantically start signing contracts with the competition. We are watching in real time as these massive economic powerhouses look to diversify. They are actively looking east, they are reassessing their alliances and moving toward a multipolar security architecture.
Meaning they aren't just relying on Washington anymore.
Exactly. They are building deeper security and economic ties with China, India, Pakistan, and Turkey. They are spreading their bets, which fundamentally reshakes global geopolitics forever.
So with the old alliances fracturing and trust completely broken, it leaves us staring into a massive void. How does a conflict with no clear rule book and where literally everyone feels betrayed actually end?
That brings us to the wild cards and the incredibly murky endgame we are currently facing. Because there are theoretical paths to ending this, but the unintended consequences are terrifyingly large.
Right. I mean, right now, the U.S. administration could theoretically stand up and declare a massive victory.
They could.
They could point to the assassination of the supreme leader, Ali Irani. They could point to the deaths of 40 top Iranian military leaders.
Yeah.
They could showcase the absolute decimation of Iran's ballistic missile supply. They could literally step up to the podium and say, "We won, mission accomplished, it's over."
They absolutely could. But Iran is currently operating as a regime backed into a corner with absolutely nothing to lose.
Right.
They have explicitly stated at the foreign ministry level that their goal now is to inflict maximum punishing damage to ensure the U.S. and his allies never, ever attempt regime change again.
So even if the U.S. calls it a win, what happens if Iran simply refuses to agree the game is over? I mean, you can't declare victory if the other guy is still shooting at you.
That is the terror of uncontrolled escalation. And there are massive wildcards currently in play that could trigger even more chaos.
Like what?
For instance, there are credible rumors floating around about the U.S. or its allies arming Kurdish factions to foment civil unrest and internal rebellion inside Iran.
Which sounds like a strategic way to weaken Iran from the inside, sure.
Yeah.
But the source material highlights that neighboring Iraq, and specifically the Kurdistan regional government, are terrified of this.
Terrified.
They are desperate to remain strictly neutral because they know that if Kurdish factions act up, Iran will retaliate directly on Iraqi soil. You risk setting off a civil war next door.
And then you have the situation at Karg Island.
Oh, right.
Karg Island isn't just a military base. It is the beating heart, the central nervous system of Iran's oil export economy. So far, the U.S. has only hit military targets on the island, but there are serious rumors that the U.S. is considering putting physical boots on the ground to seize and control the oil facility entirely.
Which wouldn't just be an airstrike.
Yeah.
That is an occupation of sovereign territory. That is a massive, massive escalation.
The forces of instability that have been unleashed since the horrific events of October 7th have blown every fragile balancing act in the Middle East completely out of the water. There is simply no playbook for an uncontrolled escalation of this magnitude.
And that is the reality of the fog we're sitting in. I mean, we started this deep dive looking at the opaque, hidden pressures that triggered this war, the decades of lobbying, the drastically different definitions of what constitutes a threat.
Right.
We unpacked the catastrophic psychological blind spot by the U.S. regarding Iranian resilience, projecting Western logic onto a theocracy, which led directly to the shock of those strikes on civilian targets in the Gulf.
And we traced how that shockwave is fundamentally rewriting the map of global alliances, driving trillion-dollar Gulf economies away from Washington and toward a diversified, Eastern-facing security network.
Right, and while all of this might feel like it's happening a world away, the ripples are going to hit your shore. The disruption of global shipping lanes through the Strait of Hormuz, the targeting of critical energy and oil infrastructure, and the pivot of massive Gulf sovereign wealth funds away from U.S. markets. These are things that alter the global economy.
Which leaves us with a critical, lingering question for you to ponder.
Let's hear it.
For decades, the entire world has relied on the United States as the undisputed foundational security guarantor of the Middle East.
Right.
If the Gulf nations, feeling burned and betrayed, successfully rebuild their security architecture around a multipolar coalition involving China, India, and Pakistan, are we witnessing not just a regional war, but the definitive, irreversible end of the American era in the Middle East?
Wow. It's a heavy thought to carry. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep looking past the noise, and always keep questioning the headlines. We'll catch you on the next one.